everybody, and welcome back to another great video about a movie I maybe sorta like. All of the videos I make covering movies are about movies that, generally speaking, aren't good. Howard the Duck, Yes Day, After Prom, all of that. But I decided today, let's talk about a movie I actually really liked, I don't think a lot of people have seen, and I think you should see. Let me take you back to July of 2021. I had just finished watching all of the Fast and Furious movies in preparation for F9. I watched F9, and I thought, how about I just watch everything Fast and Furious to fill in my knowledge of the canon. There were a few pieces of supplementary material I needed to watch. Those were two shorts, Los Bandoleros and the turbocharged prelude for Too Fast and Too Furious, and a sorta, maybe pretty much official prequel for the character of Han, Better Luck Tomorrow. And let me tell you, after having watched this movie multiple times, it is for sure the best movie in the Fast and Furious franchise. Before I get into why I like this movie so much, let's talk a little bit about its background. Justin Lin, the director of arguably the best 5 Fast and Furious movies, Tokyo Drift, 4, 5, 6, and 9. I don't know what I'm doing with my hands. These are definitely not the numbers. He was a bit of a struggling director before Better Luck Tomorrow. He had only directed 2 films before this. One of them was an indie film he made with a friend of his at UCLA called Shopping for Things, and a documentary about Japanese-American basketball leagues. Justin Lin had graduated from UCLA and was ready to make his directorial debut in 2001. What he wanted to explore was, to quote, the whole youth culture of today, specifically Asian American, but also just the general mentality of teenagers. I mean, I work with teenagers. I grew up in the 80s, and it's already very different, the mentality. You go to suburbia, look at upper middle class kids, and through the media, they've literally adopted an urban gangster mentality, which, in my opinion, to a certain extent, is still true today. On the topic of class issues, this movie tackles the topic of, Asian Americans pretty in depth. Justin Lin fought very, very hard to keep a mostly Asian American cast for this film. For a bit of context, the movie was made on $250,000, which may seem like a lot, but for a film production, it's kind of not. At one point, Justin Lin was financing the whole movie off of his credit cards and was only saved because MC Hammer heard about the movie and decided that he liked the idea enough to give Justin Lin $10,000 on the spot. Pair this with the fact that at one point an investor offered Justin Lin $1 million for the movie, but he wanted a primarily Caucasian cast, and that's just something Justin Lin couldn't do. Justin Lin said about this film, to quote, that it potentially could be the last film he ever made, so he wanted to make it about issues that were very important to him. The film premiered at Sundance, and the reason it got a lot of attention was because during the Q&A bit, an audience member stood up and asked Justin Lin if he thought it was irresponsible to portray Asian Americans in such a negative light. But then, the late Robert Ebert, one of the greatest film critics of all time, stood up and said,
I find very offensive and condescending about your statement is nobody would say to a bunch of white filmmakers, how could you do this to your people? Yes, film has the right to be about these people, and Asian American characters have the right to be whoever the hell they want to be. They do not have to represent their people.
This moment brought a lot of attention to the film and led to MTV picking it up for distribution in 2002. So, with that out of the way, let's talk about the actual events of the movie. The film begins with 2 boys sitting outside. It's a blasting hot day, so they're just kind of kicking back and relaxing. Suddenly, there's a phone ring, but it's not from either of them. They drop to the ground and hear it in the dirt and start scooping up dirt, and they find a dead body. That's when a voiceover starts, and we learn about our main character, Ben Manningbag, who is a very intentionally stereotypical Asian American who lives in a wealthy suburb.
It's not as hard as it looks. All it takes is the extra 5 minutes reading the manual after you get hired.
He has 3 simple goals: make the school basketball team, get with his crush Stephanie, and get into an Ivy League college.
And the way I saw it, as long as it made it on my college application, it was all worth it.
Occasionally, he does little misdeeds with his friends, mainly TPing houses with his best friend Virgil, or shoplifting with with Virgil's cousin Han, who is the Han of the Fast and Furious movies. Nobody really cares though because he has a promising future and gets, perfect grades. Ben makes it onto the school basketball team, but he's pretty much just a bench warmer. Despite this, Ben is relatively happy because he still feels like he, earned his spot on the team. The senior valedictorian Derek Liu comes up to him, who's basically the president of every club and the editor of the school newspaper, and tells Ben that he pretty much only got the spot to be, the token Asian on the team.
Well, how do you feel about being the token Asian on the team?
What?
It's obvious to everyone the only reason that you're on the team is for cosmetic ones.
That's bullshit. I bust my ass to be on this team.
but you never get to play.
Derek also writes an article on the issue, which gets the whole school to support Ben and kind of push the coach into giving him more playtime. This works, but Ben is still kind of annoyed that he feels like people are only sticking up for him for, being an underdog, and he quits the team. Not long after, Derek comes to Ben and asks him to join a cheat sheet operation at the school, which at first Ben is kind of hesitant to go along with, but then, he caves in. All he does is get tests early, make cheat sheets for them, and then gets paid like $50 each. Virgil and Han join him in this, and the four of them just make buttloads of money.
We were making so much money we couldn't spend it fast enough.
Ben keeps on getting good grades, and things are looking pretty good for him. At the same time, Ben is trying to compete with Stephanie's current boyfriend Steve for her affection. Steve realizes that Ben has a crush on Stephanie and offers to let Ben take Stephanie to the winter formal, mostly because she wants to go and he doesn't, and he doesn't really care who goes with her.
Isn't that your job? I don't get into all that bullshit.
The boys just keep on making money and start upgrading their schemes. They start by stealing hundreds of dollars worth of computer parts from the school and quickly go to dealing drugs, because, obviously.
It just made sense to expand our business into drugs, putting the law of supply and demand into practice. My econ teacher would have been proud.
The boys start using them and very quickly become highly addicted. Ben primarily starts using cocaine, and that just, fucks him up entirely. Constantly feels like he needs to do more and more to keep up with the academic pressures on him, and also the cheat sheet operation, and is just freaking out. One day he wakes up with a cocaine nosebleed, and that scares him enough to announce to the entire team that, hey, he's quitting. He's done.
I just want to concentrate on my own stuff.
Hell, I was thinking the same thing.
Give it up.
Yeah, fuck it. It's like a job, man. The only reason I did it was for you guys.
So he does quit, and then he keeps on being a great student and starts spending more time with Stephanie, which includes going to the winter formal with her. How sweet. Not long afterwards, Steve, Stephanie's boyfriend, comes to Ben and, the team and proposes one more score.
We do at my parents' house. Yo, that's fucked up.
Steve feels like they need to get scaring or whatever and thinks that it's a good idea to break into their house. At first, Ben and Honda want to do it, but Derek proposed the idea of using it as a way of teaching Steve his own lesson.
No, I can't.
This will be our blueprint.
So now we get to the best sequence of the film. On New Year's Eve, the four meet Steve at their friend Jesus' house to prepare, with Ben standing guard outside. When Steve shows up, they just start beating the absolute shit out of him. Steve is able to grab the gun Virgil has, which goes off, so Ben runs in, sees Steve with the gun, and just begins bashing him in the head with a baseball bat. Jesus comes in and they convince him to bury the body in his backyard for $300, but Steve begins to twitch, so you have to hold him down. Derek suffocating him for gasoline-soaked drag, while Virgil, just absolutely sobbing, holds his arms back. This scene is also intercut with Ben going to the New Year's party, talking to Stephanie, and eventually kissing her at midnight. So now we go back to the beginning of the movie. Ben and Virgil hear Steve's phone going off from the dirt, and after digging it up, they see that it was a call from Stephanie. Ben can't really figure out if he should report the thing to the police or not, but Virgil, having too much guilt over everything, attempts suicide but just ends up with potential brain damage. At the hospital, Derek is nervous that Virgil or Han might report the murder, but Ben decides to do nothing about it and just walks away. Ben is now alone, and one day while walking home, he bumps into Stephanie. She asks if he's seen Steve and says she's worried he hasn't called recently. The two kiss, and a voiceover from Ben talks about how he doesn't know what's in front of him.
There's no turning back.
The end. Let's talk about the characters in this movie and why I think a lot of them are pretty well written. First off, we have Ben, the perfect token Asian. Looking at it from a surface level, he's a little bit basic. He's just a perfect student, not a flaw to his record, but he wants to make his life a little bit more exciting, so he goes into crime. But there's definitely a lot to his character. He's a perfect representation of the upper middle, suburban, straight-A's perfect student.
Punctilious. Adjective. Marked by or concerned about precise, exact accordance with the details of codes or conventions.
Nothing he ever does is motivated by like a physical need, right? He has all the money he needs, he has every resource that he needs available to him, and it's not like he's ever at danger of going hungry at night. Yet, he deals drugs and steals an electronics, so why? Because he's bored. His life is perfect, and he can basically just do anything he wants to without any retribution, because nobody would ever believe that it was him who did it. Even when he's stealing things and TPing houses, there's really no danger, because at the end of the day, he can just flash his grades and he'll be pretty much set. So where does this take him? Drugs. Once he starts dealing, he has a little bit more pressure on him. He needs to uphold his grades, but then also uphold the drug dealing, so he starts using drugs to kind of manage both, and his life kind of spirals. Then once he realizes he's gone too far, he drops out pretty much immediately. The second he gets a taste of consequence, he's completely done. It's never brought up in the movie, but I think it's an interesting point to make that he can just stop dealing. Nobody comes to him asking for more, nobody threatens him for more. It's almost like it's like a summer job, except with the added danger of overdose. Ben's experiences are a bit of a reflection of a lot of suburban upper middle class kids' dreams of living the gangsta lifestyle, of having a little bit of excitement in their lives, of having some sort of potential consequence in their lives. Then we have Steve, who's more of a reflection of what Ben wants to be more like. Steve has it all. Good grades, he's dating the prettiest girl in school, he's like Mr. Bad Boy, but he has it all. So Ben, of course, is like relatively jealous of the guy, but Steve himself wants more excitement in his own life, so he does what he thinks is the best move, which is to add excitement to his own parents' lives. And he does this in the form of breaking into their house. Of course, this never works out for Steve, but it's interesting to see how even when he has everything that a different character already wants, he needs more himself. Let's talk about the parents in this movie, which is to say, none of the characters, which I think is pretty important. There's one scene in the beginning that might have Ben's mom, but I'm not entirely sure. He rushes into a hospital and then needs to translate the doctor's directions to an older patient who's it only speaks in Spanish. It's never specified to be his mom though, it's left a little bit more ambiguous.
Unfortunately, all the really worthwhile things about high school were few and far between.
She is right down the hall.
Well, what I'm most concerned about are the abrasions on her arms and her back.
Más que nada, estoy preocupada por las heridas en tus brazos y espalda.
No, eso fue mi culpa. Me caí en las escaleras y me lastimé. Pero ahora me siento lo más bien. Dígale, por favor.
It was my fault. I fell down some stairs, but I feel fine now.
Justin Lin pretty purposefully decided to leave out parental characters in this movie because that's kind of how they act in the boys' lives. They're not there. They provide them with everything they need, but they don't really have any value in the boys' lives, and the parents don't care at all. Han and Derek aren't the most interesting characters, but they're still pretty fun. Derek is mostly just an introduction to the world of crime. Like all of the characters, he's living the life or whatever, but he needs more. He's the leader of all of the clubs and teams at school, so naturally, he's the leader of the cheat sheet operation, and later, I think it's kind of implied that he sort of leads the drug operation. Han is cool, smart, calm, collected, but he's also really aggressive. Originally, only Derek and Ben drop out of the cheat sheet business, so it's only Han and Virgil left in it. But then Virgil tells a lot of people to it, to the point where Han gets suspended. Han takes this as an opportunity to beat the shit out of Virgil, and Ben comments in a voiceover that he doesn't even think that Han really cares about being suspended, he just wanted a reason to beat Virgil up.
The funny thing was, Han didn't really care that he got suspended. I think it just gave him yet another excuse to beat the crap out of Virgil.
Despite that, when he's committing suicide, he calls Han to the hotel room and not Ben. Actually, let's talk a little bit about Virgil. Virgil isn't my favorite character in terms of how much I like him. He's more my favorite character in terms of how interesting he is. Virgil is sort of the ultimate version of Ben. He's still got really good grades, but he's just super obsessed with the gangsta lifestyle. He's the one who jumps on ideas. He's just the one who goes all out. A big goal of his at the beginning of the movie is just to get a gun. Eventually, he's gifted one, and he just kind of like whips it out and about like all the time afterwards. There's one scene where Han and Derek hire a sex worker so that, you know, Ben and Virgil can lose their virginities, and once it's Virgil's turn, he asks for head, she refuses, and he pulls out the gun on her. After she leaves, they're all arguing, and Virgil pulls out the gun on Derek and points it at him until he leaves the room. In this scene, and for a lot of the movie, Virgil is sort of the villain. Virgil is a piece of shit objectively, but the group still hangs out with him mostly because he and Ben have been friends for years and he's Han's cousin.
We were always pissed at Virgil, but we always let it slide. We had to. He's like that little puppy that keeps shitting on the carpet.
That's not to say that they don't care about him though, especially Han. When Virgil is attempting to suicide, he calls over Han to watch some new porn with him. Virgil only pulls the trigger once he hears Han at the door. Even then, after his attempt, Ben is really harsh on Virgil. As the camera watches Virgil's body bleeding out, Ben speculates that the only reason he called Han over was because he was too scared to kill himself alone.
Han said Virgil had called him over to watch some new porn. I guess Virg just didn't have enough balls to do it alone.
Justin Lin was originally planning to shoot this film on digital, but within 2 weeks of starting filming Fujifilm, and Kodak proposed deals with the director and he switched to 35mm. I think there's advantages to filming on both film and digital, but for a movie like this that is sort of, more low stakes, it should be shot on film. This gives it that sort of like grain, a little bit faded out, just cool looking look. Sure, the lighting is like very grungy and early 2000s reminiscent, but realistically speaking, this film could have been shot like 40 years ago or like 2 years ago. This was cinematographer's Patrice Lucien Cochet's first film, yet he fucking killed it. The shots are beautiful, but then also perfectly portray the emotions of each scene. There's also just a lot of like fun shots in the movie. There's a common effect that uses this like sort of a fisheye lens, but not really, that I sort of like. Real quick, let's just show some of my favorite shots from the movie. The ultimate shot of the film, the most impressive one by far, is during the final murder of Steve. The characters are all clearly freaking out, they're killing somebody, so the camera is like spinning around them, and it's really offsetting because you don't really expect the scene to be filmed like that. This kind of like gets you in with the characters, because you all feel a little bit, off-put. It's also a great way of portraying and showing the emotions of every single character in the scene. The camera spins around Han and Virgil, and Han is sort of like freaking out, but he's pretty calm and collected, while Virgil is just, sobbing and shaking and crying. Giving a full 360 kind of enhances those emotions. There are also 2 reaction shots intercut, which is one of Derek's face and one of Ben's face. Both of these also move side to side, which kind of keeps the camera moving during the scene and adds to that freaking out feeling. The camera doesn't stop moving throughout the entire scene, even when it goes to them like burying the body for like half a second, and only stops once we get to the serenity of the New Year's Eve party. This movie is just gorgeous. I really like it. I think filming on film is a really good choice in most situations. That's just another reason why I like this movie. Before you ask, no, I did not steal this Minions IHOP menu. It is mine, and I acquired it through legal means. So, as all great video essays go, I must now make this about myself. You're welcome. I'm obviously not Asian American, if you couldn't tell, but I can relate to being like a high-achieving, bored, middle-class suburban kid. Especially over the summer with nothing to do, that need for excitement definitely kicks in. I've never like significantly struggled with school. Sure, it's hard in the moment, but I've never gotten lower than like a B on any final grade. I have a relatively high GPA, but that doesn't really matter because everybody in my school has it. Almost everybody I know goes home to like a nice house with 2 stories and a nice yard. But then why does literally everybody I know listen to like gangster rap? Why do people just in general consume media about theft, about heists, about crime? Why do people deal and use drugs all the time? It's excitement. No matter how much we as people like to pretend we want peace, once we do get it, we're like, pretty bored. And once all of your needs are met, crime, drugs, maybe something you may go to. Maybe, just maybe, Better Luck Tomorrow is a reflection of what we truly want. Sure, the characters get into fucked up situations and nearly die, but there's something almost idyllic about it. There's been a lot of examination and study into why people enjoy and seek out gore, and maybe it's because we want our physical needs to not be met. When your physical needs aren't met, then you can't really think about your psychological needs at all. You can't really be worrying about like girl issues or friend drama if you aren't, safe. As I said, Virgil is the most interesting character to me, but why? He's a terrible person with a ton of issues, and I just enjoy his character so much, but I can't explain why. Whenever I do, I just kind of circle back to explaining who he is as a character, and that's kind of my best reasoning. Like, oh yeah, I like Virgil because, he's an interesting character to look at, but why? Because he's messed up? Because he's a terrible person? Why the fuck do I find that interesting? Better Luck Tomorrow isn't a perfect movie. It definitely has a lot of issues, especially in the development of a lot of the characters. I purposefully overlooked a lot of issues that the movie has in this video, but I don't think that really matters. I think Better Luck Tomorrow is an amazing portrait of what upper middle class suburban kids will do just for a little bit more excitement, and it really resonates with me. Better Luck Tomorrow, maybe not be the perfect movie, but I like it. Thanks for watching.